If you're anything like me, you likely have an indecisive gene and never really know when to stop. This video is gonna fix that. So last week we talked about why it is so important to never get attached to certain ideas or details in our drawings and paintings, because that can cause a stubborn block in our minds. But with that said, however, I realized that I left last week's video very open-ended. While it is important to be able to appreciate change and embrace new ideas, sometimes you just want to be done with the project and let it go and move on to the next one. So how do you finish a painting? I looked all over the internet and there aren't that many tutorials that tell you how you can take your painting to a definitive finished stage. Not many people talk about the little finishing touches that can definitely take your painting to a state of completion. And today, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. Before we dive in, please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful, and hit that subscribe button down below because I make new super helpful videos every single week. But with all of that said, let us now jump into my top 5 tips on how to finish a painting. Now, unlike the usual speed paints that you've come to expect on here, today we're actually going to start with a pretty finished painting. This is a painting of Jupiter, which is part of my unintentional planet/deity series. As you can tell, I've got most of the painting done already, and I am now at a stage where I feel it is time to start wrapping this up. So here are the 5 steps that I use in order to take this baby from looking like this to looking like this. So without much further ado, let us now jump into this list. As you can see, I've already got a fairly complex background in place, and I've made it detailed enough that it tells a story, but not so detailed that it is overshadowing the character. So here I want to show you a very simple trick that instantly adds a ton of ambience and perspective to the background, and that is to add gradient layers. Now, you can use the adjustment layer option, but I prefer to create a new layer and use the gradient tool. Personally, I like to darken the bottom of the painting because to me, that really simulates the shadows and ambient occlusion that you would find on the ground, whereas the sky is usually clear and not occluded by many objects. Sometimes I'll do the reverse and lighten up the top instead, but here I'm doing both, obviously. It depends on which details I want to preserve and which ones I'm happy to hide behind a gradient layer. This is also a great trick to use if you have no idea what to do with the background. Just splash the whole page a mid-tone color and then add darker or lighter gradients, and it instantly creates the illusion of a horizon. If you'd like a tutorial on how to paint backgrounds, let me know in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to make one. Tip number 2 is super useful if you're working on fantasy pieces, but also applies to just any dramatic portrait, and that is to add a rim light, or a backlight as it is sometimes called. What this is a light source that is directly behind the character. Because the character is blocking the light source, all you can see is a strong bright outline just around the edges of the character. We can simulate this effect by picking a high value or high saturation color and simply outlining the character. Personally, I like to only do one side because it adds a nice asymmetry and breaks the painting up. You can totally do both sides of the character, but just be wary that if your character doesn't have dark enough values, it might look out of place to have an all-over rim light. But in either case, it adds instant drama and helps your character or object or creature to stand apart from the background. Okay, I am extremely guilty of abusing this tip, and it has taken a lot of practice to learn when I should ease off on this, but my 3rd tip is to add specks of light, dust, and random particles. There are loads of brushes that will do this for you, but my favorite are the ones that came in Dave Greco's brush set. I will leave a link to it down below. These brushes add randomly scattered specks of dust and foreground matter to the canvas, and I find that not only does this add a ton more realism since dust is constantly in the air IRL, these random floating specks also create a very subtle sense of movement. Think about it, you probably only see floating particles if there was a breeze. And if you've shown flowing hair or fabric like I have, the floating specks will further push the idea of a strong, conveniently timed gust of air. But most important of all, these tiny flecks of light tend to bring balance into a composition. You see, when you're painting a specific concept, it is really easy to create a whole bunch of large elements, the character, the mountains, the clouds, and by the time you're done with all of these bigger elements, you completely forget about the little details. But you need a good balance of large and small elements in your painting to create a good sense of rhythm. Without the little details like the specks and dust, your composition will appear way too stationary. So do yourself a favor, start adding flecks of foreground matter or stars or dust in your work. You can thank me later. So in tip number 2, we spoke about how to get a character to stand out from the background, right? Tip number 4 will help you temper this a little so that the character doesn't look entirely out of place. Grab a nice smudge brush and smudge some of the outer edges on the character. There are loads of custom smudge brushes online and it takes a bit of getting used to the digital smudge tool, so only do this on a proper painting after you've tested it on some practice ones before. But what I like to do is look for the edges on a character that are skippable, as in you could smudge them lightly without losing any of the storyline. So for instance, in this piece, I'm going to smudge a little bit of the edges of all the drapery on him. You don't necessarily need all of the edges in order to recognize the cloth as cloth or the skin as skin, meaning you're not really losing any meaningful details by smudging some of the edges here and there. But what this does is literally blend the character into the background, creating the impression that he does in fact belong in this scene. So subtle yet so effective. And my final tip for today is something I like to keep for the very end, and that is to play with the lighting. Personally, I do this after taking a break of several hours because it helps me have a better perspective. But once I have all the details in place, I like to start playing around with the levels, the hue and the saturation, the color balance and the lighting as a whole. I adjust the brightness and contrast as well as the overall tones across the painting. If needed, I'll also add a new layer and softly airbrush some more lights in. This specific step is mostly intuitive and you don't have to change too much if you're happy with how it looks already, but sometimes I'll find that because I've been staring at a painting for so long, I've completely lost sense of brightness and contrast, and this is why I like to take a break, ideally overnight, and come back to it with fresh eyes. Once it's all finished, I like to flatten the painting. I then duplicate the flattened layer and apply some type of sharpen filter to the duplicated layer. But because I want all the sharpest details to be on the character, I then mask out the background areas on the duplicate layer to reveal the initial unsharpened layer below. That way, the only sharpened details are where I want them to be. Think of it as the field blur filter, but opposite. And finally, I add my signature on there and export it as an 8K PNG for my patrons. I then resize the exported PNG to other sizes for other Patreon tiers, as well as for on here on social media, etc. But yeah, that's the finished painting. As you can see, the final painting turned out quite a bit different to how I had originally started in this video. At the start of the video, I had what I would call a finished painting, but as you can see, there was still a couple more hours of work left to do. But that's just how it goes with painting, and that's why I made this video, is to show you that it's okay to take your time and put in the last bit of effort to really make that painting stand out. Sometimes when we come back with fresh eyeballs, we realize all the little tiny details, the little nooks and corners that could really take a painting from good to great. So I do hope this video has helped you figure that out. If it has, then please remember to give me a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button down below, because I've been so good with uploading every single week, so you gotta give me something for that. And also a massive shout out and massive thank you to everyone who has subscribed to my channel recently. The growth is insane to me. I don't know about you, but so thank you so much for hitting that subscribe button. I really appreciate it. It helps me out so much to know that I'm not talking into the void. Okay, I'm gonna stop. With all of that said, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope it's been as much fun for you as it has for me, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.